The Mafex stealth suit version of Batman from the Hush storyline would be the equivalent of a peg warmer for Mafex. I imagine you'd walk into the equivalent of a Target in Japan and see this dude warming the shelves alongside the Huntress and the badly reviewed comic book version of Thor. But why? It can't be because the market is oversaturated with Batman action figures at this point. You really can't find many 6-inch scale Batman figures, period. McFarlane has produced almost every type of Batman action figure imaginable at this point, but at the 7-inch scale, that's a completely different galaxy as far as 1/12 scale collectors are concerned. I mean, you can't find a Batman figure this singular as a stealth suit Batman at the 6-inch scale. So why the lack of love for this version of Batman? Does it deserve the cold shoulder it's getting from the fans? Or is this something you should be spending your hard-earned money on? Now, I understand that the action figure market is cold as dry ice right now. It burns to the touch if you're a seller. I'll leave that to the experts. I'd be remiss, however, if I didn't point out that disposable income isn't exactly flowing from out of our pockets right now. Having said that, true action figure collectors are tenacious. They find a way to get what they want, because we're good that way. On this note, is this dude one of those guys that you need to have in your collection right now? Let's take a look. So Stealth Suit Batman has been out for over a year now, and yet the market still has not warmed up to it. I admit that when I first laid eyes on it, I was a bit put off by certain design elements, which seemed to ruin the playability of the toy. An obvious such design element would be that mouthpiece. I'm sure that if there was a way to remove the mouthpiece, the desirability of this figure would probably shoot way up. So why didn't Mafex provide this feature, or even an alternate head sculpt? I mean, at this price point, why not? It's actually more expensive than the other Mafex Hush Batmans, the blue and the black versions. However, inflation has a little something to do with that, and yet adjusting for inflation, they're about the same price. So what's going on here? To be fair to Mafex though, if you take a look at the Hush storyline, there seems to be almost no other mode for the character to exist in when he's wearing the stealth suit. Indeed, the stealth suit Batman makes all but one very brief, though striking appearance in the story. And I'm talking about the comic book, not the animated feature, by the way. It would be wrong then to fault Mafex for remaining mostly true to the storyline. Mostly. There is one big miss on Mafex's part here, and I'm going to get into that in a bit. On the surface, it must have seemed like a no-brainer to Mafex to produce this version of Batman with its unique design elements and novel features. Mafex has made odd decisions in the past as to which action figures it decides to release, so it remains somewhat unclear as to what they were thinking from a business standpoint. Story-wise though, there's a better reason as to why they might have decided to release this version of Batman. A better reason, in my opinion. So there's one aspect about the stealth suit Batman which brings out an element in the character that you rarely see and that people don't celebrate as much. It's the reason why I decided to do this video to begin with, namely the James Bond element to Batman. Batman is a detective, he's a brooding gargoyle, an obscenely skilled combatant, but he's also the billionaire with all the toys, all the gadgets, and the capital to bankroll high-flying Mission Impossible style missions. Stealth Suit Batman embodies all of that in spades, which is why I like this version of Batman. And yet, Bruce Wayne is no James Bond. He's too dour, too focused on his mission to get what he wants by any means necessary, the way James Bond would. Batman is also too principled to be that seductive. Bruce Wayne only plays the playboy role, whereas James Bond, well, we all know he always gets the girl. Indeed, his power to seduce is an integral part of James Bond's arsenal. It's kind of almost like a secret weapon for the secret agent, right? Personally, insofar as I find the James Bond character interesting, that would be it. I find all of that wall-to-wall, what can they think of next, action stuff, a bit mind-numbing after a while, to be honest with you. I definitely prefer the Batman mythos. Overall, that is. As a character, however, I think James Bond has a little more complexity than the Bruce Wayne character has. Namely because of his tortured relationship with women, which is something that we saw in Casino Royale. On that note, I think the Hush storyline is Batman's Casino Royale. At heart, a love story, there's a sexiness to Batman in the Hush storyline. And that there is this Batman's main issue, in my opinion. Fighting crime in a Halloween costume as elaborate as a stealth suit is one thing. But it's not going to do much for you when it comes time to scoring with the ladies, unless you make some adjustments. Though the Mafex stealth suit Batman definitely embodies that James Bond international man of mystery and action. And though unique, the design elements here greatly reduce the versatility and thus the playability of the character. There are scenes involving Batman while he's still wearing the stealth suit that would require a little more versatility. An alternate head sculpt, for example, would have enabled the action figure to embody the more romantic aspects of the stealth suit Batman. And if you're thinking, look, I don't buy action figures to stage love scenes, well, that's fair. Although that is one of the more important elements of the Hush storyline, which is something that I plan to explore further when I review the Mafex reissue of the Hush Catwoman action figure. But in more general terms, Mafex's decision to narrow the scope of the character leaves him stuck in one form of action, rendering him awkward for almost any other scenario you can imagine. This Mafex stealth suit Batman is basically a three-dimensional splash page, albeit a really, really cool one. And so, what are my final thoughts on this? Unfortunately, I wish I could say that this figure was underrated, but it's actually not. Especially at the MSRP for Japanese import figures out here in the States. Thank goodness for the wired cloth goods cape. Without it, this figure would be even more limited, but with it, it actually photographs really well in certain scenarios. The articulation was also surprisingly not that good for a Mafex figure. It's a very bulky design, mind you. All of the tubes and gadgets on the suit's chest obviously limits the toy's articulation. This is one instance where I think perhaps Mezco could have done a better job, given that they do cloth goods on all of their figures, if I'm not mistaken. The stealth suit design being baggy could have benefited from a cloth goods treatment. It would have given the character more mobility and his articulation more range. Although I do appreciate that the sculpt on the Mafex version here, where the suit is concerned, is really detailed, really fine, and is accurate to the comic book. So ultimately, this figure is too narrow in scope and purpose to qualify as a must-have piece in your collection, especially in this economy. It's a Japanese import, so even at sale prices, it's still twice as much as, say, a McFarlane Batman. You're not going to get too much bang for your buck here. And yet, if you can afford it, it is worth finding a way to sneak this one into your Batman collection, in that it does represent one of the character's less celebrated but still essential character elements. The stealth suit jumper Batman might not hold its own in the Playboy department with a James Bond or an Indiana Jones, but it definitely hangs in there where the international man of action element is concerned. And so definitely worth a second look if you can get a good deal on him. And these days, I'm sure you can. Thank you for watching, and I hope you stick around for more.